Hey, it's Meredith. You know, it's one thing to tell people about the shameful parts of your past. It's a whole other level when you watch those moments acted out on the big screen. In the fall of 2023, that's exactly what happened for Miss Kay Robertson. As the mother of the Duck Dynasty clan, she became famous for Louisiana cooking and loving her family. But before the happy years of Duck Dynasty, back when Kay and her husband Phil were young, they were a mess. And Kay shares their story, the one that became the movie The Blind, in this archive episode of The Unfolding. Page 180 of The Unfolding is the story of Miss Kay Robertson.
I told God, I want their daddy to be a Christian man. I want him to come to you more than anything in the world. But if he doesn't, me and these boys will follow you all the days of our life. And if there's a reason why we don't get him back, I've just got to trust you, God. I'm not leaving you.
God's story has been unfolding
since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Another page in the unfolding.
Hi, this is Meredith Foster. When Miss Kay Robertson was a young girl, her grandmother told her one day she might have to fight for her marriage. Well, that seemed crazy to Miss Kay's young ears, but it turned out her grandmother was right. Long before Phil and Kay Robertson and their sons became famous for making duck calls and the television show Duck Dynasty, they lived through 10 hard years. The story of those early years is being told in a new movie called The Blind. Phil and Kay started a family and married as teenagers. While Phil was playing football for Louisiana Tech, he began drinking, and when he did, in Miss Kay's words, bad things happened. Miss Kay says back then, Phil was the worst of the worst and well on his way to either jail or an early grave. She knew if he was ever going to change, it would take a miracle.
We were in a small town, not over 200 to 300 people there, but we had the biggest grocery store. It was a hardware store, a grocery store, and you could buy gifts for, wedding showers and things like that. We had the big store. It was called Caraway's, which was my maiden name. My grandmother and grandpa, it's so interesting how they even got this store back in the hard times. And, after the Depression and all that. And then I remember they said, well, we traded it for something. I mean, it was just I wish I had the whole story about that. Mm-hmm, but my grandma and my grandpa had the store and it grew bigger. They had 2 boys. One of them was my dad, and they literally worked, their family is who worked in the store. And we provided groceries for the town and all kind of needs, but there wasn't any other stores. So we really had, I guess, and that's why they consider us rich. Now, my grandmother had the first brick home in the town. Wow. And everybody thought that was something. Of course, it's nothing now, but that was something because they worked their life in that store and saved their money and built a brick home. We just had a little wooden house, and it was not fancy, but it was nice, and I was comfortable there. And but we were considered, like I say, I guess some of the richest people in town. But I want you to know, because I did stay with my grandmother a lot, because my parents worked all the time, that she was constantly teaching me. We would sit in the swing outside and we would talk about life. We'd talk about everything. And she gave me a lot of good lessons. And one of the things she told me is, don't you ever think you're better than anybody else just because we have the store and we have houses and, your cars and all that. She said, God's blessed us, but we worked all our life for this. But don't ever act like you think you're better than somebody else because you have more. A lot about the inside, that's what mattered, my inside, not my outside. I mean, that's just how I was raised. Mm-hmm. And somebody would say, well, I thought you owned all the stuff at Ida. That's my town. And I would say, well, yeah, we do. And they were like, well, you don't act like you own it. I mean, See, they couldn't get over that I was, I hope, humble, and they just people didn't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandmother did.
How old were you when your father passed away? You were still fairly young when that happened.
14 years old.
Oh, wow.
It was the end of my 9th grade year.
Wow.
Yeah, it was hard. He was only 49.
Oh, my goodness. Did that change your family dynamic? How did, he'd worked so hard.
You think it would? Yes. And everybody had encouraged my mom to start dating. I don't know if I was that crazy about her doing it, but then I understand that all her life she was very dependent. And back then, women didn't even write a check.
Wow.
The men, so she was pretty dependent on him for everything. So to her, it was like, I don't know if I can go on without a man to take care of me. And then, of course, in my life, I was like, well, I wasn't in a rush for her to date or anything, but I understood it. But it did change my world.
Did she remarry?
She did. That lasted 8 years. That's all. And I will say my stepfather back then, I had really prayed it would be like a good man, because you all of a sudden have another man in the house, and I'm 14 years old. But I will say he was a total gentleman to me and never, ever made me feel afraid.
Wow.
I really felt good, and I appreciate his kindness to me, and of my stage of life. Because I know I was kind of stupid too. I'm sure I'd run through in my undies and everything else because I was not mature. And he would always turn his head or something. I mean, just very, very gentlemanlike. So I did appreciate that. But my mother, on the other hand, didn't do well. In fact, she became an alcoholic.
Yeah, so I assume that made things at home, that would be hard, especially as a teenager.
Well, which would wind up why Phil and I were together too soon. But as it worked out, it worked out. But I wouldn't recommend that to everybody. I think because I had the training from my grandmother is why we made it. And God was working. But I wouldn't recommend that to most girls my age were very immature. And I'm not saying I wasn't mismature, but I think my grandmother had so many grounded things in my head that I really was a step ahead of most of the girls I knew my age.
Well, what were some of the things that your grandmother told you?
Well, she always told me it was one man and one wife, one woman for life. And she said, you don't even ever think about the D word, which is divorce, but she would never say it and never tell me I would not have to use that because when you married, it was for life. And she told me how that God, he loves us, but he lets us go through hard times because hard times builds our faith. It builds our strength. And we have to do that. And she said, in fact, there'll be a time you'll have to fight for your marriage. And there, I just threw a fit because I said, well, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to have to fight for my marriage. I already know the kind of man I want and all this, and I want him to hunt and fish like my daddy. I wanted some characteristics like my dad had. And it was really funny because Phil actually has some characteristics. Like he loved hunting and fishing. And he was different. Just he did remind me of my dad.
What was your faith like as a teenager?
Okay. We went to Ida Baptist Church, and I was always there. I had a good bit of trouble with Mom because I used to wear my cowboy hat, which was wore out. It was an old felt hat, but I was such a cowgirl. I had a little Shetland pony and all. So every time I'd sneak that hat in the car, and I would be all dressed up. And right before I went in church, I put that hat on, which you can imagine what kind of trouble I got in. And my mom would make me go back there and hang it where the men hang their hats. She said, you're not wearing that ugly hat in church. But we were always there. My mama was the secretary for the church a little while. But I just remember always knowing about God, about church, about people worshiping together, how important it was. And but I wasn't a perfect child in there either. I mean, I remember getting in trouble for talking in church and kind of making fun of somebody, and I got in double trouble on that one. But I always knew there was God, and I always knew there was church, and that most of the people that were the better people in town would go to the church, even though I would see people at our store maybe drunk on Saturday night, and they were up there on Sunday, saying hallelujah and all that. And I said, I don't think they act right. I mean, as a little girl, I could see that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So how did you first meet Phil?
It's really funny because we went to the same school. They bussed us in. We all came from little bitty towns. So they bussed us to a bigger high school called North Caddo High School. And we went from, I don't know how many different towns. I would say maybe 6 different towns, little towns. And we all came and bussed together and went to Viewing, which was about probably 18 miles from my house.
Wow.
So we bussed in, and I saw it. I was well aware of him because I knew he was a quarterback of the football team. He was not the first start when I first met him because he was only 15, but he was backup. And I was real interested in that, loved athletes, loved football, loved that kind of stuff. And again, I found out he hunted and fished like my dad. But back in those days, the woman wasn't the one to make the first move. It's supposed to be always the man, our boy. But what we had was the funniest thing. There was an upperclassman girl, and she decided that we would make a cute, cute couple. So what she did was she told me that he wanted me to walk him off the football field that Friday night after the game. She told Phil the same thing, but it was about me, that I wanted to walk him off the field. She actually just set us up with us not even knowing she did it. And that was our first experience. And I pretty much fell head over heels. But he was, and I'm not saying he didn't like me. I think he did. But again, he was big hunter and fisherman and all that. So we were doing fine dating till it came hunting season. And then he said, we can't go together during the hunting season because I can't give up that. And I can't go to you like you want me to. So we just need to break up and be friends for a while. That's what he said. And then we'll check later and see. So that's what happened. And and he dated somebody, just not anything serious. And I did the same thing. I would go out with somebody. I'm not serious about them. I really didn't like them, but I didn't want to sit home every weekend. And it was fun going to movies or eating out. So we both did that. He did it less than I did. And then how we got back together, or we realized each other, was in May of my 9th grade year, was when my dad died. And when that happened, I had so many of my classmates and all that came to the funeral and came to help me. And when I looked up the people, all the kids that were walking by the casket, I noticed he was there. And he looked at me and waved and said, I want to talk to you. And I said, later, like that, from sitting with my family. And after the funeral, at the graveside, he was there. And he said, next week or something, could you go out with me? Or when you feel like you can, go out. And I said, yeah, I'll go back out with you. So that we got back together. And we've been together. This is a funny thing. Now, this is not how long we've been married. This is how long we've known each other. 64 years.
Wow.
Yes, that's right. And from that to 4 boys to a daughter we didn't know we had. I mean, it was just our life. I don't know. It just all of a sudden became so interesting, I guess you'd call it. And there were so many people that would want me to tell the story because they thought it was really interesting of my life and the 4 boys and all this stuff. And I got to where I did it a lot. So when the first time a church asked me to come speak and tell my story, I just thought, at the church, you want me to come speak at the church? Yes, it's a Women's Day, and you would be perfect to tell your story. So I got up there, and I remember I couldn't even talk. I just stood there thinking, I didn't even do that well in English. How am I going to talk to a group of women? And the lady who invited me came up there, and she whispered in my ear. She said, you're nervous, right? And I said, shaking like a leaf. I said, I don't know if I should do this. I've never done it. And she said, well, here's what I heard. I heard that you had such a hard time, almost lost your family, and that God came through for you, and now you're standing strong in his presence. And I just looked at her and I said, well, that's true. And then she just looked at me and said, tell it. Tell that story. I've told it about 1,000 times since.
I know for a lot of people, if they just watched Duck Dynasty, they'd be like, what's so difficult? They made duck calls and it was, but the early years were really tough. And I wonder if you could just share about that. You and Phil ended up getting married.
Yes.
You have little boys.
We had Alan early. I was pregnant before we were together. But what happened there was just with my daddy dying, my mama going on her way, I was kind of left. My grandmother, she was too old to kind of take care of me. Mm-hmm. We were close till she died, but, she was older and not able to really just help me in my life. But I know one thing, she gave me that faith. She talked about that faith and holding on to God. And I really love the true story of it. And she would say, it's just not going to always go right, Kay. Mm-hmm. You're just not going to have it easy. It's going to be where you're fighting for your marriage. And I was like, why would I do that? And she said, because it's God and it's Satan. And God wants you to have the best marriage ever. But Satan wants to destroy your marriage. And he's going to be in there with everything he can do to destroy it. And so I really learned early that it was a battle. And most people my age didn't understand that at all. But when I had gave my pledge to Phil, I just this is forever. And I never thought it would not be. And that night he put us all out, which if you've seen the story, you would know about it. That was just such a shock to me because I just looked up in heaven. I said, God, I never left him. He put us out. What am I to do? It's like I tried. I didn't give up. I did everything. And I still wasn't giving up then. I just said, I'm going to pray harder. I'm going to try harder. I'm going to tell my boys not to hate their dad. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing that you need to do. Because what you need to do if you're in that situation is understand that when your husband acts like the devil, it's because the devil spirit is living in him. And he doesn't know how to get it out. And that's what I would tell my boys. I said, your daddy's a good man. He has a good heart. He is a good man, but he's not acting like it because the devil has resided his spirit in him. And your dad's not fighting it. He's letting it go. And that's why he's acting like he does.
After you got married, when was the first time that you saw that devil in Phil? Can you remember what that experience was like?
Well, he was in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's the first thing when I went up there to join him on our first summer. And he, took off the summer to work. In fact, Louisiana Tech, where he played football, got each one of the football players summer jobs because they knew they needed it and they wanted to kind of control them so that they would, not get in a bad place. And that summer, I just saw he worked around all these men that were what I call rough men. They've been out there. He was a, 18-year-old boy that hadn't been in a rough atmosphere. And I saw the changes come from the people he was with over and over. And he never drank. He was not a drunkard or drinking boy at all. But he became one because they wanted him to. It was like everything they wanted him to do was not what I wanted him to do. And you just saw the devil just coming in, taking over. Wow. And that's when I said, oh no, I got to get him out of this atmosphere. But I couldn't do it till we got paid and, had to go back to Tech. But by the time he went back to school, he was changed.
Can you describe that? What was life like with him?
He was drinking, over drinking. He wasn't as sweet a person. He would say things. Well, and I will say this. He never acted bad unless he was under the influence. But when he did get under the influence, it was bad. But I will say something that I just discovered, and this is so many years later, and I never realized it till I thought about it. Phil never kept his liquor, his beer, anything at our house. It was always in the vehicle or wherever he went. And, I thought to myself, he did not want his boys to see that. So even when he did it and knew he was wrong for doing it, but he still had something in him that wanted to kind of protect the boys.
Can you talk about the night? Now, this would have been several years later when he put you out. That's such a hard scene to watch in the movie, but it really happened. Can you talk about what happened that night?
Well, I was just, the boys just didn't understand. They kept saying, why does Daddy want us to leave? Why is Daddy putting us out? And I would try to explain that was Satan. And then your daddy was under the influence of the liquor and all that. And that's why I said he's not himself, because the devil's got inside of him and his spirit is controlling him. And I didn't know how much the boys could understand it, but it was the best explanation I could think of to tell them. And every night they'd pray for him, and every night they would just wish him back. But they didn't want him to come back in a bad way. They knew. They said, we want him to stop drinking and come home. When we left, it was so funny because I didn't get a lot of good stuff. I wasn't the type to say, I'm going to clean you out. I wasn't that way at all. I just took what we needed. And then the boys would say, Mom, can you go change TVs and let Daddy have the little bitty black and white one? And we could have the other one. And I said, no, we're not worried about the TV right now. We will be happy. We have a little black and white TV. We can still watch TV. I would try to tell them things like that because I know that was hard. I know it was hard for them to even understand. That's why when it did, and he did come back and he did change, that's why the boys were so happy.
How old were they when that happened?
Yeah, I'm trying to picture that in my mind because I want to say that Alan was about 10 years old or 11, right? He's the older one. And then Jason, and then Willie, and we didn't have Jep, of course, then. So we had those three. Willie was really too little to remember. He remembers little parts of it. And he remembers his daddy not being hollering or not being nice, And the other boys, they understand a lot more of it. But I was we were going to church. I would take them to church. Of course, I was so embarrassed, I wouldn't tell people at church what was going on. Because really, back in the older days, we didn't open up and share like we do now. And you know that because that's just the way it was. And you really tried to hide your problems instead of sharing them with who you should have shared them with. I've learned so much about that since. When you let it out, it frees you and it helps you and everything. But we want to hide.
How did you get through it? And I'd love to hear even like what your prayers were like when you were talking to God as you were going through that. How did you get through that time?
Well, a lot of time I would say to God, God, you told me, and Nanny, my grandma told me, and I know she loved you better than anybody in the world, that I was going to go through hard times and but you're never going to leave me. You're here. You love me. But I feel like that when I was like 27, when he really put us out, I really went back and talked to the preacher that eventually talked to Phil, the only one he had talked to. And I told him, I said, I don't know if I even understood when I was a little bitty girl giving my heart to Jesus. I don't think I even understood it like I understand it now. And I said, I just want to do it again. And I want to be baptized again. And so I did. And I felt like then I just gave my whole heart. And I told God, I said, I want their daddy to be a Christian man. I want him to come to you more than anything in the world. But if he doesn't, me and these boys will follow you all the days of our life. And we're never going to give up on you. And if there's a reason why we don't get him back, I've just got to trust you, God. And I'm not leaving you. That's what I said. I really thought about I wanted to go to sleep and just not wake up. If you saw the movie, you know about that. That night in that bathroom, I just thought about that. And then when I thought about Alan knocking on the door, saying, Mama, don't cry. God's going to take care of us. He was 9 years old, maybe 10. And I thought, out of the mouth of babes, here he is, a boy, taking care of my other kids. He had fed them. He gave the baby a bottle. Alan was that old. He took care of him. He changed his diaper. And he would say, Mama, don't cry. Don't cry. God will take care of us. He will. And he said one day he's going to help Daddy. And my thoughts were not at all, as somebody would say, it was to go to sleep and just rest and wake up and everything be good. I never thought in my mind, I want to commit suicide. I did I was so tired and I didn't know what else to do. I felt like that I was when you lose heart, people lose heart and they all of a sudden can't see hope. That was the night I felt my hope just dwindling away.
It was the darkest night for Miss Kay. Kicked out of the house, it seemed like all hope for Phil was gone. The only way forward was to surrender Phil and her future to Jesus. One of the things I think is significant about what you did was that you surrendered it. You surrendered Phil to God, whether he comes back or not. And that's a very hard thing to do. Sometimes I think that's really important that we come to a place where we say, God, I'm going to serve you no matter what happens here.
That's exactly what I said. And I told the children. And they just kept saying, well, why can't Daddy come? And I said, well, it's like he's got a veil on his face. He can't see past the devil, Satan. And I said, while he's controlling him, he does not see what we see. And they would say, he can't see Jesus. And I said, that's right. He can't see him right now. He's blind to him. I said, but we just have to love God, stay together and pray and never give up, even though your dad may not be with us.
That's hard.
It's hard.
In that season, while it was just you taking care of the boys, you're working. How did you function during that time?
It was so funny how God just gives you help along the way. I mean, he did. And one of my bosses was a Christian man. And every day that I came to work, he would ask me to come in his office and he would pray for me and my family. And we did it. Nobody knew it. We just did it. And he knew. And then he'd say, if you ever need me to pray for something, or even if I could talk to Phil, if he wanted me to, I said, no, right now I don't think he would, but maybe one day he would. That was such a blessing. And I had a girlfriend I worked with, and every day I would tell her, I said, I'm not going to talk about my troubles today because you're tired of listening to them, and I know you're praying for me. And then every day at lunch, I would go and talk all about my problems and wind up tearing up, and she would hold my hand, and she said, let me say a prayer for you. And so every day he gave me those people, to be right there. And sometimes I look back and I don't see how I made it, but I did, because I know I told the boys, I said, we're going to follow Jesus and we're going to pray for your dad every day of our life. But if he doesn't come, we're not leaving him. We're staying faithful. And I told the boys, I said, one day you'll understand it, and we'll always pray for your daddy and always hope for the best. But only God can change stuff. And the boys would just say, oh, well, Mama, why can't you just get the devil out of him? And I said, I just can only pray it out of him, but I can't do anything.
During that time, did you see any signs from Phil that something was happening or that God was working?
Yeah, I could see that. I knew the more he didn't have us there, the more he was going to realize what we did mean to him. And that was exactly what happened. He was going to have this bachelor pad and all this women and, drinking and stuff. And what he found, that was just come shorter and shorter to not making him feel good, always making him feel bad. He always had a hangover. He saw this life is not good. And I'm sure he missed us. He missed his little boy sitting in his lap. He missed me taking care of him, cooking for him, being there. And, he had to live through it and suffer through it for him to see, is this the life I want? Mm-hmm. And it sure came up short.
Yeah, the phrase a lot of people always use is you have to hit rock bottom often. And for Phil, that finally happened. How did that begin to turn around? How did the rock bottom happen and he began to turn around?
I love to tell you that. That preacher I told you about, he had come one time to the beer joint where Phil was, and I was up there too. I was up there just trying to take care of him or think I could help. And it was so funny because the people at the beer joint said, now y'all, nobody say nothing to Miss Kay because she's a nice Christian lady. And I wanted to say, bless her heart, they got confused. Why would I be up the beer joint? And they said, she's trying to protect her husband, but he's not listening. So they were like, appreciated me. They didn't make fun of me because I didn't drink. I didn't like that part, but I was kind and nice to everybody because that was who I was from my grandma. And, and the little boys, they didn't understand, but they knew we had to get Daddy out of that beer joint. But so this one preacher I brought up there, he just marched in the back door, and Phil's sister, of course, had to do with that. He was just so friendly and so nice. And Phil said, well, I bet you've never been drunk. And he said, oh, yeah, I was drunk, Phil. I was just as drunk as you've been. And he said, but you're not now. And he said, nope, I found Jesus and I have no reason to get drunk. He said, but until you understand, it's not about you. You think it's all about you. And the devil wants you to think that. He said, you've got a beautiful family. You've got a life. You got good health. He said, one day you're going to see it's just not about your selfishness, which is what that was about, Phil being so selfish. And all of a sudden, Phil said, well, I never thought I'd meet a preacher that had been drunk. And he said, well, yep, in my early days, I was just like you, but I'm not like that now. So when Phil did come to us after he saw that his life was falling apart, you know who he wanted to talk to. He wants to talk to that preacher that had actually said he got drunk when he was young. So nobody else now. He only had to talk to him, which I called him on the phone. And I remember I said, you've got to come to my apartment tonight. Phil wants to talk to you. And he was like, let me check my schedule. And you know what I said? When I think about it now, I can't believe I said this to this great I said, what is more important than a lost soul? You've got a lost sheep. He wants to talk. I said, whatever you have, can't you change it? And he told me on the phone, he said, you're right. Nothing's more important than a lost soul.
So he came to your apartment and talked to Phil that night.
He did. And Phil said, I don't believe people. And he said, Phil, if I'd have been running around with the people you run around with, I wouldn't believe anybody either. But do you trust this? And he held up the Bible. And Phil said, yeah, that's right. That's the real thing. He knew the Bible was the real thing, but he didn't trust people. And Bill said, I don't blame you. The people you run around with, I wouldn't trust any of them either. And so that night, the boys were in there just praying, and they just said, can he stay? Can he stay, Mama? He's trying. He's really trying. Can he spend the night, Mama? Please let him spend the night. So we let him stay that night, and he was there for the next night. I think it was either 2 or 3 nights that he studied with the preacher. And then I don't think the story did this in the movie, but what they didn't realize, well, Phil was very impatient. Well, you could tell that by when you're real selfish, you're impatient. And so we would leave him and Bill to study in that apartment. And me and the boys would run, to Dairy Queen or get a hamburger or do something and give them some time by themselves. And then we would come back. When we came back, I think it was the third night, there was a note on the door that said, come to the church, hurry. That was on the door. So when we get to the back of the church that night, he was in the baptistry and he was given he wants to make Jesus the Lord of his life. He wants to repent. He doesn't want to get drunk anymore. I mean, the whole thing. Well, I looked down at every one of those little boys, just big tears running. Yeah, I can't even talk about it. And they said, is Daddy going to get the devil out of him? And I said, yep. And then you know what they said? They said, well, Mama, is he coming to church with us? And I said, he will. And they said, what if he cusses in church? I said, everybody will forgive him. They'll understand. He doesn't know how to live as a Christian, but we'll teach him. The church will help us.
How long had you been separated about? Do you remember?
It wasn't a year, it was months, maybe 5 months.
But a long time. And you had been praying and it seemed impossible. I'm sure there were times where it seemed in the natural impossible.
Oh my goodness. I knew, I said, see, I told the boys, I said, God is stronger than the devil. You say, what happened? God is stronger. And they said, well, what if the devil comes back to get him? I said, We're going to teach him so much in the Bible. We're going to make him have Christian friends that can help him. I said, we've got to be strong now, and we've got to help him. And I'm telling you, we literally hid out in my little bitty apartment, and all his old friends could not find him. He was hid. And I mean, he was like 6 nights out of 7. He was with that preacher or with somebody at our church, really good, that was helping him to learn, to grow, and everything. And we hid out. Of course, they found us. You know, the devil always finds you. But by then, Phil was so much stronger. He was like, nope, boys. And what Phil told him was really funny. You'll love this. He said, that Phil Robertson don't live here anymore. And they said, we're looking at him. He said, not the same person. I'm not the same person I was. This is a different Phil Robertson. Of course, they didn't know what to think. They said, he's lost his mind. I said, no, he finally got his mind.
Miss Kay, you have watched the transformation. It's like Saul to Paul, such a dramatic transformation. Your faith, having lived through and watched that so up close and personal, I have to imagine that your faith now is so different than when you were, say, 16 years old, because nobody is too far gone.
Exactly right. And I think my biggest struggle has been with people. We try our best to save marriages and help. And of course, Phil's always teaching people about Jesus. But the thing is, it's just everybody's not going to change. Not now. Maybe later, maybe never. I don't know. And it just breaks my heart, because they will think if they come to us and ours work, that theirs will too. And it won't always. And of course, that breaks my heart. But I just told him, I said, God's still in charge. Never give up on him, but you follow him and do the right thing and bring your kids with you. But you just never quit praying. But there will come a time. And there's a lot of times when the man goes off with another person or whatever. And there'll be a time when you've done all you could do, but you just have to. You are in charge of those children. So you have to be the leader of the family to get them to heaven.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about that. We had a number of people who sent questions to talk to you, and several are in that situation where they fought and their spouse chose to leave. The question they ask about is like, how did you not give in to bitterness? How did you walk out forgiveness? You had so much. I mean, he had put you out. He put you through something so difficult. How did you forgive?
Okay, this is where I think we're dropping it as women. The Bible always teaches the older women train the younger women. My grandmother filled my head through many scriptures, many things that Jesus taught in such a common way. She didn't even go to school she had to get out and work at 13. She couldn't even go to school because they were so poor. And she married my grandpa at 15 and worked and raised her 2 boys. And I'm telling you, what we just don't realize, is when we follow him, we love him and we pray. But everything always doesn't work out perfect, And you have to, no matter what, you just can't take your eyes off. And you've got to know God's in charge. God's running things. I don't know why this happened. I don't know why this happened. I don't know why I went through all that my whole goal was just to marry the man I love, have 4 children, which I did have 4. I did not ask for 4 boys, but he pulled a joke on me. Instead of 2 boys and 2 girls, he gave me 4 boys. And I did it. I raised them. Well, just never give up on God. Never give in, and understand that the devil is controlling the evil in the world. And you have got to look to God, stay with him, raise your kids with him, pray, pray, pray. But if it doesn't work out, do not get bitter. I learned that from my grandmother. What good does bitterness do you? What good does hate do you? What good does all that do except ruin everybody's life? I remember when I had my boys and it was just us, and I would take them to do real funny things or silly things or things that we did. And they'd come home and they'd say, Mama, why did you go out there and make us laugh so hard? Because I told them, okay, we're hurting without your dad, but we're still following Jesus. And other people are looking at us, and we're an example to them. And they may come to Jesus because of us, or they may not. And I saw the bitterness of other people. I saw the hate. I saw all that, and I saw no good. That's just what Satan wants. He wants you to become like that. He wants you to not be a good follower. He wants you to look and just think about the bad, and don't do it. Don't fall captive to that. That's his plan.
Would you be willing to pray? I'm just thinking of those who are feeling trapped by that bitterness and they don't know how to let go of it.
Okay. Our Father in heaven, we love you so much. God, we wouldn't have life without you. You gave us the breath that we breathe. You're everything there is, and our life without you is nothing. I thank you so much for never letting go of me and holding on to me and helping me. And God, for giving me such a wonderful family. As of right now, we have 50 people in our family, and they all love God. They all love you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the different Phil I have. Thank you for the one that has his Bible in his lap way more than he doesn't. Thank you for teaching us that you are the only answer. Help all the people that are suffering out there. I want all the marriages to work. I know you do too, but sometimes we just have to fight for our marriage, like my grandma said. And sometimes things will change. Phil changed because of you, because of the blood of Jesus, he changed. But Father, please help the women who don't have that. Help them to have that, or to know that they can follow you. Only them. And if the husband doesn't come, you never quit praying for them, but maybe there's a time that you just have to move on. And I'm one for doing everything you can do, Father, and you know that, to save marriages, to save families, to teach people about Jesus that don't know him. Father, please help people not to become bitter. Bitterness, to hate, it is just all the signs of what the devil wants of us. Don't let him be a winner in that. Please help us just put our faith in you. Know that we follow you. You will never give up on us, and we're never going to give up on you. And please just help us to the best life we can be till we get to heaven with you all the time. And help us bring as many people as we can, and let there be more Jesus families in this United States of America. Please, Father, in his name, and thank you for all you've done for me and my family. In his name, amen.
Miss Kay said it was hard to watch their lowest moments lived out on the big screen. But the stories of people who have found hope in Jesus after seeing the movie make it all worthwhile. The Blind became Fathom Events' most successful theatrical release ever, $17 million at the box office. A phenomenal response. And it included things like standing ovations in the theater and baptism spontaneously. The movie is available to stream on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, and other platforms now. And you can learn more at theblindmovie.com. And as you may have heard, both Miss Kay and Phil have struggled with some health issues this past year. Phil was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Kay had a serious fall recently. Their extended family has talked about how much the prayers of friends and fans have made a difference for them. So thank you for praying for the Robertsons. And thanks to Miss Kay for sharing her story. Thanks to all the folks that helped to make this episode of The Unfolding possible. Lindsay Caparoon, Michael Shermack, our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is a production of Faith Podcasts. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.